All right, we're about to dive into something that's going to totally flip what you think you know about one of anime's most notorious characters. Seriously, stick with me here, because this gets surprisingly deep.
So, let's just get right to it. The big question we're tackling today is, can a pervert be a moral hero? I mean, that sounds completely contradictory, doesn't it?
Well, get this. The analysis we're looking at didn't just find a few good things about him. No. It found a moral exemplar. Yeah, you heard me right. So how on earth did they get there?
Okay, so before we get into the wild results, we gotta set the stage. We need to talk about who this character is and why this whole thing is so mind-blowing. And the guy at the center of all this, it's Issei Hyoudou from High School DxD.
Yeah, if you've seen the show, none of this is a surprise, right? He is the perverted protagonist. The whole character is built on these ridiculous, lecherous jokes, and pretty much everything he does seems to be driven by, well, that's the character on the surface. That's the mask.
Okay, but here's where we take a hard left turn. Someone did a super deep dive, a full moral analysis of his character across like 29 volumes of the story. And the number they came up with at the end, it changes the entire conversation. 82%. That's it. That's the score. That is Issei Hyoudou's final official moral development score. Just think about that for a second. An 82. What does that even mean?
Well, here's the official breakdown. That score, 82%, puts him in the top 10 to 15% of human moral achievers. I gotta repeat that. We're not talking about other anime characters. We're talking about real-world psychological standards for morality. And look at this chart to see just how nuts that is. He isn't just a bit above average. The average person clocks in around 40%. College grads, about 55%. But Issei, at 82%, actually scores higher than the people we'd call real-world moral exemplars. Wow.
Which brings us to the question that's probably screaming in your head right now. How? How is this possible for this character?
The whole secret is this absolutely massive gap between the person he pretends to be, the walking punchline, and how he actually behaves when the chips are down. We're talking a 63-point difference between his persona and his actions. That's huge. And this chart just lays it all out perfectly. See the red bars? That's his surface-level shtick. Pretty low scores, right? But the green bars? That's his actual behavior. And those scores are through the roof. It's not just a little gap, it's a canyon.
Let's zoom in on the most shocking part. His persona? It scores a measly 20% on sexual conduct. That gets him labeled a perverted harasser. But his actions when it comes to consent? A perfect 100%, a total 180.
So, what does 100% in consent ethics really mean? It's not just a nice thought. The analysis shows that over 29+ volumes of story, there is literally zero non-consensual intimate contact. His track record on this is flawless. Period.
All right, so we get why the score is so high now. It's actions over words, but what exactly makes up that 82%? Let's break down what makes this guy tick, morally speaking.
This chart here is great. It shows his moral profile is incredibly well-rounded. He's not just a one-trick pony. He's got these near-perfect scores in a bunch of different areas, like protective empathy and abuse intolerance. It all adds up to a really solid moral foundation.
So let's run through these real quick. We already talked about the perfect 100 in consent, but look at this. 95% in protective empathy. That's what drives him to be a hero. 95% in abuse intolerance. He just can't stand seeing power being misused. Another 95% in loyalty. And even his lowest score, emotional honesty, is a super high 85%. That's because he's not afraid to admit when he's scared or weak, and that's huge for avoiding moral mistakes.
And this is so important. He wasn't always like this. He didn't start out as a moral giant. This chart shows his journey. He literally starts at what's called stage 2, which is basically just what's in it for me. And over the course of the story, he climbs all the way up to stage 5, which is all about deep personal principles. He earned this morality. He wasn't just born with it.
And you can pinpoint the moments that forged him. The trauma from what happened to Asia early on, that became his moral compass. Then you see these moments with Rias and Akano where he recognizes their vulnerability, and that's what locks in his commitment to protection and consent. Later on, he learns to be emotionally honest with his own family and even starts teaching these ethics to the next generation. It's a whole arc. But you might be thinking, okay, but how much can we trust this one number? Is this just one person's hot take?
Well, let's look at how they validated this thing, because it's pretty impressive.
This right here is the proof that 82% isn't just a random number they pulled out of a hat. They ran the analysis using 5 different independent psychological models. And look, they all landed in almost the exact same spot, right around 82%. That tells you the finding is solid. It's not a fluke.
So let's just put it all together one last time in this simple, kind of shocking comparison. The average person, 40%. People we look up to as moral leaders, 80%. And issei hyoudou, the anime pervert, 82%.
Okay, so why does this matter? Who cares, right? It's just some character from a story. But I think the lesson here is way bigger than just this one show. It's really about what we find when we look past the surface-level jokes. This quote just nails it. When you stop looking at the comedy and start measuring what the character actually does, the score doesn't just bump up, it quadruples. It goes from a pathetic 20% all the way up to an elite 82%.
And really, that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. This whole deep dive into a fictional character ends up teaching us something pretty real. It makes you wonder, right? How often do we judge people, in stories and maybe more importantly in our own lives, by the silly or annoying mask they put on, instead of looking at the real pattern of their actions? What are we missing when we do that?